recognize the difference. It's clear as we would recognize the difference between Disney World and Cleveland. We think we know the difference between a good person and a rotten person. But what about this vague idea of what it means to be a good person will help us to get there? How are you going to find out? Now, you've got an advisor, you've got all sorts of faculty who can give you all sorts of help. They can tell you how you're going to become an occupational therapist, or how you're going to become a nurse, or how you're going to go into business, or how you're going to become an accountant, or a preschool teacher, or a youth minister. But where do you go to figure out the most important question? Where do you go to find out the difference between how to become a decent, good, kind, worthwhile human being rather than a douchebag? Now, you got leaders, you got all sorts of political leaders and pundits and public and things. Can they tell you? You can buy self-help books. You can go to seminars, kind of like this, Tony Robbins running back and forth on the stage. And yet, can these people tell you? Who of these people can tell you what you should be? Now you have a vague opinion. That's the great thing about being your age. You can't even afford to fill up your gas tanks, but you can afford to have all the self-righteous opinions in the world. I wish I were still there. But these opinions, are you going to bet your life on them? Are you going to bet who you in the end are going to be on these vague opinions? Are you sure? Do you even know what it would actually mean to be absolutely certain? Many years ago, thanks to some kind of cosmic joke, the god Apollo sent a message to a rather beat-up middle-aged stonecutter in the city of Athens, telling him he was the wisest of all the Greeks. It really happened. A friend of Socrates goes on holiday to the temple to Apollo at Delphi, where there's a prophetess and Sibyl, and asks her a question, and she says, he asks her, who's the wisest of all the Greeks? And she says, there is no Greek wiser than Socrates. Friend comes back, tells that to Socrates. Now, Socrates figures there has to be some kind of mistake. Surely, in all of Athens, this is classical Athens. These are the people who built the Parthenon, gave us the foundations of mathematics, all sorts of great things. Surely, there is somebody who's smarter than Socrates. So he goes out in search of somebody who actually knows stuff. He goes out in search of a wise man. He starts at the top. He quizzes the politicians, business leaders, civic leaders, servant leadership people, the people who should know what's going on. And he asks them all the really important questions. What is virtue? How do I know how to become virtuous? What is piety? What does it mean to be devoted to the gods? What is justice? What is love? What is temperance or self-control? And when they'll give him an answer, he'll cross-examine it. He'll see if it's actually flawless, if there aren't some weaknesses, if it isn't just opinion, but if it is actually truth. And what he ends up finding is that, like the talking heads of our day, they really don't know. They have a vague opinion, just like you, but they don't really have any answers that stand up to cross-examination, that stand up to this close scrutiny. So finally, he decides that oracle, that message from the god Apollo, it must have been right. Because these people, these leaders, these wise men, these teachers, all these, don't know any more than he knows. But the difference is, he knows that he doesn't know. And he knows that he needs to keep searching. And that makes him the wisest of the Greeks. So Socrates, throughout his life, had this search for truth, a truth that wasn't muddled up with half-truths. He had an ongoing quest to drive the Athenians further, to try to scratch behind these vague opinions and half-truths and appearances, and really try to find truth. He was searching for questions, answers to these questions. He was looking for truth in an uncertain world. Luckily, today, of course, we have a certain world where we know everything, so we don't have to deal with questions like that. No, it's the same thing. It goes on and on, searching for truth rather than opinions. So, and the way he searches, he's trying to decide what's mere appearance, what looks like it's true, what feels like it's true, what we take to be true because everybody seems to believe it, and what is really real, what is truly true, what will stand up not only to his scrutiny, but will stand for all eternity. And he does this by asking these questions. And it's called the Socratic method. It's a way of inquiring by asking questions, by cross-examining the answers, by going back and forth with this. Another word they use is dialectic, which is a fancy way of saying a dialogue, but it's a cross-examine back and forth to try to arrive at the truth. And with this cross-examination, of course, as I've said, he cross-examines all the important people, actually even the unimportant people, all sorts of people, cross-examines them and discovers and points out, and actually gets a bit of a crowd. He gets a bunch of young men who start following him, because it's a big kick to watch Socrates cross-examine all these people who think they know it all, and discover that they don't. And sooner or later, a bunch of these people who've been shown to be not wise, or in other words, shown to be total fools, get kind of resentful about it. And they get kind of resentful of Socrates. And they bring him to trial. And he's convicted of impiety and corrupting the youth, and is sentenced to death. By impiety corrupting the youth, the main argument is that, look, society functions because people believe the same things, because people go to the same rituals and ceremonies and churches, because people participate in the same things. That's what keeps a city strong. And people who teach you to question all of that, people who throw all that in doubt, it starts to chip away at the very foundations of our society. And so that was actually the point of the trial. And on some level, they kind of had a point. Because he was. He was calling all the Athenians believed into question. And so he was sentenced to death. Now, interesting thing about Socrates. He didn't actually write anything himself. We have no record of things that he had actually thought, except as they were recorded by other people, predominantly 3 other people, and so one of whom is his student Plato. And through these writings and through the centuries of reading these writings, he slowly comes to evolve. So we don't know at which point these writings really were Socrates, and at which point these writings become literature, writings on their own. And we don't know exactly where this smelly, middle-aged, old stonecutter ends and where the great martyr for truth begins.